Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to a second edition of Breaking News of this Friday. It's the 18th day of April, 2025, Good Friday. And in the headlines, some very important stories. First of all, we hear that Iran will never agree to dismantle its uranium centrifuges or to eliminate its stockpile of enriched uranium. That's from an official of Iran, reported by the Times of Israel. The Mossad chief, as well as Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, will meet U.S. envoy Witkoff in Paris ahead of the U.S.-Iran talks that'll be held tomorrow. That's from the Times of Israel. Evidently, they've already met, but no report of what they said. Now, a third headline: Iran wants guarantees Trump will not quit a new nuclear pact. This is from an Iranian official. It's a Reuters story. In other words, if he agrees with one, there's got to be something in that he won't back out of it like he did with the last one. Of course, the last one he didn't make. That was an Obama one. Now, this next one is fascinating. According to Breitbart story, Donald Trump will walk away from Ukraine talks in days if Moscow and Kyiv aren't serious about peace, warns Marco Rubio. I wonder if he'll say the same thing. We'll talk about this about the Iran-U.S. talks, that he'll walk away from that if there aren't, if Iran isn't serious. But anyway, that's an interesting story. And finally, the Trump administration changes the COVID website to say its true origins are from a Chinese lab. Epoch Times. That's true. It's from a Chinese lab. The only mistake they made in the article, they say it's a leak from a Chinese lab. When it was not a leak, it was deliberate release from a Chinese lab. It was basically bioterrorism. We'll talk about that. All right, what's in the headlines? Headline number one: Iran will never agree to dismantle uranium centrifuges or eliminate its stockpile, says an official Times of Israel story. Tehran's red lines, mandated by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, cannot be compromised in the talks, the official says. He said those red lines mean Iran will never agree to dismantle its centrifuges for enriching uranium, halt enrichment altogether, or reduce the amount of enriched uranium it stores to a level below the level it agreed to in the 2015 deal that Trump abandoned. It will also not negotiate over its missile program, which Tehran views as outside the scope of any nuclear deal. Iran understood in indirect talks in Oman that Washington doesn't want Iran to stop all nuclear activities, and this can be a common ground for Iran and for the U.S. to start a fair negotiation, the source says. That was Witkoff's huge mistake there by saying that, or intimating that. Iran said today reaching a deal with the United States was possible if they demonstrate seriousness of intent and do not make unrealistic demands. Top U.S. negotiator Steve Witkoff, in a post on X on Tuesday, said Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment to reach a deal with Washington. Unfortunately, he did not say that last Saturday. When they talked in Oman, he gave the impression, well, we'll let you enrich some uranium. And so, like we said, you give them a little bit and they want to build on that, take more, 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 and more. That's why it's got to be all or nothing. So this next headline is really interesting. Now, we haven't heard what happened, but the Mossad chief and Ron Dermer, the Strategic Affairs Minister, were going to meet Witkoff in Paris ahead of the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks. It's from the Times of Israel. Israel said is looking to influence the U.S. position. Israel Katz vows whatever it takes to stop Iran from getting the bomb. As Iranian foreign minister says, deal is possible if the U.S. isn't unrealistic. Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer and Mossad head David Barnea met with U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff on Friday in Paris, Axios reported, citing three Israeli sources familiar with the meeting. The unannounced meeting took place ahead of the second session of the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks that Witkoff is set to hold in Rome tomorrow, Saturday. Reports said that the Israelis were hoping to influence the U.S. position ahead of the talks amid fears that the Americans could agree to a deal similar to the one Obama administration reached with Iran in 2015, the so-called JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was abandoned in 2018 by U.S. President Donald Trump. The meeting came amid fallout from a New York Times report on Wednesday, partially confirmed by Trump on Thursday, that Israel planned a joint assault with the U.S. next month on Iran's nuclear sites, but that Trump vetoed the plan in favor of negotiations. So, no report as of yet. If we get one tomorrow morning, we'll let you know, but we haven't seen anything yet from the newswire about what the upshot of that meeting was. And we'll see what happens tomorrow with Witkoff and the Iranians, because the Iranians have been saying all week, no to this, no to that, we won't do this, we won't do that. So our question is, what's there to talk about? Anyway, we'll see. Now, headline number three, here we go. Iran wants guarantees that Trump will not quit a new nuclear pact. Iranian official says this is a Reuters story. Iran told the U.S. in talks it was ready to accept some limits on uranium enrichment, but needed watertight guarantees Trump wouldn't ditch another nuclear pact. Iran told the United States in talks last week it was ready to accept some limits on its uranium enrichment, but needed watertight guarantees that Trump again wouldn't ditch this pact. This is from a senior Iranian official. Iran and the United States are set to hold a second round of talks tomorrow in Rome, a week after the first round of negotiations in Oman, which both sides described as positive, whatever that means. Trump, who has restored a maximum pressure campaign on Iran since February, ditched a 2015 nuclear pact between Iran and six world powers in 2018 during his first term and reimposed crippling sanctions on Iran. In the intervening years, Tehran has steadily overstepped the 2015 agreement limits on its nuclear program, designed to make it harder to develop an atomic bomb. Former U.S. President Joe Biden, whose administration unsuccessfully tried to reinstate the 2015 pact, was not able to meet Tehran's demands for guarantees that no future administration would renege on it. Tehran has approached the talks warily, skeptical that they could yield a deal and suspicious of Trump, who has repeatedly threatened to bomb Iran if it does not halt accelerating uranium enrichment program, which Iran says which is peaceful, and of course they're lying about it. While both Tehran and Washington have said they are set on pursuing diplomacy, they remain far apart on a dispute that has rumbled on for more than 2 decades. And believe me, there is no common ground whatsoever. Who knows what they can talk about after these statements this week from Iran? Know this, know that. All right. Now, what's interesting here, though, from Breitbart, Trump will walk away from Ukraine talks in days if Moscow and Kyiv aren't serious about peace, warns Rubio. In other words, get going or I'm getting out of here. The U.S. will do whatever it takes to get peace in Ukraine as long as either side or both actually engage in the process. But as things stand now, America will move on within days if there's no signs of progress. Neither Ukraine or Russia are engaging in the peace process properly. From Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he suggested on Friday morning as he boarded his flight back to the U.S., saying if there isn't a breakthrough in the peace process within days, the U.S. would disengage. The U.S. is not willing to attend endless, unproductive meetings like what we saw last week in Oman and probably see tomorrow in Rome. Endless, unproductive meetings and meetings for the sake of having meetings. Rubio told the press on the tarmac in a barely veiled criticism of both Moscow and Kiev. He said, "We came here yesterday to begin to talk about more specific outlines of what might take to end the war, to try to figure out very soon. And I'm talking about a matter of days, not a matter of weeks, whether or not this is a war that can be ended. If it can, we're prepared to do whatever it takes to facilitate that, to make sure it happens, that it ends in a durable and just way. If there are no indications the two sides are actually willing to agree to a ceasefire, previous bids to establish such a state have been met with further demands for concessions, conditions, and carve-outs, then the president's probably at a point where he's going to say, well, we're done." Now, remarkably, Rubio appeared to imply that neither Russia nor Ukraine appeared to be engaging properly, saying in his remarks that the U.S. was on the verge of walking away, but that it wouldn't if either side or both got on board to make progress. This is a tacit admission that at present neither is. He said, "We're trying to prevent bombings, but we're not going to be flying all over the world and do meeting after meeting if no progress is being made." So, while his remarks were stark, Rubio's warning also made it clear the U.S. stepping away from unproductive talks, what he called meetings for the sake of having meetings, was not Trump washing his hands of Ukraine. If one side or the other was really to engage in good faith, the U.S. would come back to them and mediate, he said. Now, one major area of friction between the U.S. and Ukraine in recent months, and we know this very clearly, was the collapse of the rare earths mineral deal. That was what, remember, Zelensky was supposed to sign there at the White House, and he didn't. A device created by Trump administration to rebalance the relationship between the two nations to allow the U.S. to make back the billions it had donated to Kyiv under the last presidency, and it blew up spectacularly when President Zelensky came to Washington with fresh demands, if you recall that, when Trump threw him out of the White House. Yet positive moves, here we go, appear to be underway here, with Zelensky saying on Thursday, good progress had been made on the minerals deal. President Trump has said a full deal could be signed as early as next week, and Ukraine said Friday morning it has signed an outline deal with Washington, possibly heralding the exact progress Rubio said the U.S. needed to see. Well, what's going to happen? Here we go again. Stay tuned. Interesting, isn't it? Now, finally, Trump administration changes COVID website to say the true origins were from a Chinese lab. This is from the Epoch Times. The Trump administration on Friday changed the White House COVID-19 website to include assertions that the virus's true origins are likely from a laboratory in Wuhan, China, and it faulted a number of entities and individuals for how they responded during the pandemic. Now the page displays an image of President Donald Trump walking forward ahead of the text lab leak and the true origins of COVID-19. Lab researchers in Wuhan, it says, were ill with COVID-19-like symptoms in late 2019. They weren't the only ones, or months before the COVID-19 was discovered at a nearby wet market in Wuhan. The lab also had a history of unsafe practices and performing controversial research, the website said, by nearly all measures of science. If there was any evidence of a natural origin, it would have already surfaced, but it hasn't. The administration says of COVID-19, the Chinese Communist Party coronavirus. All right, it's good they're finally saying that officially from Washington. But as we've talked about since early 2020, yes, the Chinese Communist Party coronavirus was come from the lab there in Wuhan, but it wasn't a leak. It was a deliberate act of bioterrorism. And it was meant to do what it did, disrupt the world in such a way which um, millions lost lives, billions or trillions of dollars was lost in economies. And China is, communist China is totally responsible for that. But so at least they're making progress there. So, okay, here we are tomorrow. What's going to happen in Rome? Will there be any news that is positive? Probably not. They can't keep saying, well, we had a good talk. It's very constructive. Are you making any progress? And the good news is if Trump's willing to walk away from the Ukraine-Russia talk, hopefully he'll be able to walk away soon from this one and get going with the military aspect that needs to get done. Now, remember, even in the story we had yesterday about, Trump saying, well, he's not in any hurry to do this. We'll wait and see. He wants to give diplomacy a chance. There have been a bunch of ordnance shipped to Israel, new bombs, the bunker buster bombs, new missiles, and that have come to Israel just in the last couple of days. So they're seemingly very serious about going through with this if it is necessary. Now, we talked about earlier today, there's a few people on his inner circle that aren't really happy with this idea. They don't think it's the best idea right now to do that to Iran. And, they think there's going to be other consequences from both China and Russia if something like that happens. And, it's a fair statement. But on the other hand, it's got to be done because, see, at the end of the day, Iran is not just interested in destroying Israel. Iran's also interested in destroying the U.S., and they've said that over the years, too. And the last thing you want to see is them, producing an ICBM and doing a test with that with like North Korea did a few years ago with a dummy missile on it that's the size and the weight of a real missile. You don't want to see that happen, particularly from the Iranians. So we'll wait and see tomorrow. There's always something to check out. Never a dull moment. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.